During the 1950s, Walt Disney had jumped into live-action filmmaking. In the previous installment of this series, we talked about his fictional films like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, The Shaggy Dog, and The Swiss Family Robinson. But at this same time, he was interested in another form of filmmaking, documentaries. Walt Disney would end up making over a dozen shorts and full-length features based in the natural world. My name's Josh Taylor, this is Modern Mouse, and today I want to talk about one of Walt's forgotten accomplishments, his film series that he dubbed The True Life Adventures. Disney's True Life Adventures were groundbreaking films, and I feel like a lot of people have forgotten or don't want to acknowledge the importance of these films that Walt and his crew put together. There are definitely some negatives that come along with the True Life Adventures, and we will talk about that. But that doesn't take away how revolutionary these films were to the entertainment industry and to their audience. Think about this. In the 1950s, commercial airlines had just gotten started, and they were really for the wealthiest of travelers. So many people weren't traveling to far-off destinations for vacations. They were mostly going wherever their car could take them. That means that most people had never seen certain cultures or cities or animals. In fact, that's what the circus like Barnum and Bailey's thrived on. When the circus came to town, it was a big deal, since most people had never seen elephants or lions before. They'd only read about them or seen a picture or two. Documentary films were the next evolution of that circus. Most historians consider the 1922 film Nanook of the North to be the first major documentary film, a motion picture showcasing an Inuit family's life in the Canadian Arctic. The film's success pushed filmmaker Robert Flattery to continue making documentary films about people from all around the world, including one about the people of the Pacific Islands called Moana. That's just a fun fact I wanted to stick in this video. By the end of World War II, documentaries were still pretty rare. Most people were seeing the world through newsreels and local theaters rather than documentaries. So it was a big gamble on Walt Disney's part when he decided to spend money to make a short film documentary. He hired Alfred and Emma Milo and spent $100,000 to send them to Alaska to film any kind of life they could find there. The Milos would bring back over 18 hours of footage to Walt Disney, and he and his crew got to work finding the story they wanted to tell. In the footage, they found human life to be rather boring and opted to focus in on seals that they found off the coast of Alaska. Putting together footage and then creating a story around that footage was a standard practice for documentaries at that time. So Walt brought his staff writer, Winston Hibbler, in to help create a story, and then he narrated the film. The end result was a 27-minute short film called Seal Island. Disney's distributor, RKO, didn't know what to make of it and refused to push it to theaters, so Walt Disney booked a theater in New York and another in Los Angeles himself, in order for the short to be nominated for an Academy Award. It would go on to win an award for Best Live Action Short in 1948 and proved RKO wrong in their presumption of Walt Disney's new documentary films. For the next few years, Walt Disney would continue creating short films like Beaver Valley, Waterbirds, and Bear Country. Of the 7 short films he made between 1948 and 1953, Walt would win 5 Academy Awards, one for every year, except for 1949 because he didn't actually make a short that year. These 30-minute or less films were so successful that it gave Walt the idea to start creating feature-length versions of these true-life adventures. Keep in mind that a short film and a full-length feature film are very different. People pay money to go see a feature film and are usually pretty happy with whatever short comes before it because they didn't really pay to see that short. So to move these stories about animals from shorts to feature films meant that Walt was so sure that people were willing to spend money to see the true life adventures that he wanted to start making them. And the first full-length feature in this series was The Living Desert. On a budget of $300,000, a crew was sent to Arizona to shoot whatever they could. Inspired by footage from UCLA of a wasp and a tarantula fighting, Walt really wanted to showcase the harsh reality of the desert and what it was like for animal life to live in such a rough place. The film features kangaroo rats, rattlesnakes, bobcats, and scorpions when a flash flood hits the desert. The film's most iconic scene features two scorpions in a mating ritual set to square dancing music. Scenes like this were criticized by some for making jokes rather than showcasing the true beauty of nature. The film itself is riddled with sound effects and narration and music that add touches of humor to what would otherwise be a pretty dry film. Walt's intentions were never to make a dry nature film, and felt that the additions from his team enhanced the enjoyment for families watching, without taking away from the wonder of nature. Just like Seal Island, RKO didn't see the living desert as something that could make money. Rather than fighting his distributor, Walt Disney created his own distribution arm, Buena Vista Pictures. In the previous video in this series, I talked about how RKO Pictures stopped and Buena Vista Pictures began with Rob Roy as their first major release. But the true first release for Buena Vista Pictures was this film, The Living Desert. And Buena Vista Pictures came around solely based on the idea that RKO wouldn't want to distribute any of the true life adventures going forward. And Walt Disney wanted to continue to make nature documentaries. The Living Desert would make over $4 million at the box office and would win an Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature in 1953. That gave the company momentum going into their next feature, The Vanishing Prairie. Walt Disney grew up in the area of the United States between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains. His heart was truly in the heartland of America, so it was an obvious choice to shoot a documentary in the prairie lands. This was also a time period where Westerns were at their hottest as a genre. In part, maybe that's why The Living Desert worked, and it's why The Vanishing Prairie would also work. It features prairie dogs, bighorn sheep, and buffalo. The themes of survival, family, and mating cross over from The Living Desert into this film. Like the previous film, it received praise and criticism. The Vanishing Prairie would win an Academy Award for Best Documentary in 1954, but it would actually be banned in the state of New York for showing a buffalo giving birth. Walt Disney stated that he never would have added the scene if he felt like it would offend anyone, and he believed it was right to show children the miracle of birth, rather than trying to convince them that storks also bring baby buffalo. The American Civil Liberties Union, or the ACLU, would lodge a complaint in the state of New York to showcase real life as it was meant to be seen, and that nothing offensive was happening in the film. New York would eventually overturn the decision and show the film, but Walt Disney being censored for a graphic film would be a first. The next feature was 1955's The African Lion. Filmed by Alfred and Elma Millette yet again over the course of 2.5 years, The African Lion is a stark contrast to the previous two films. It's the first of the features to take us outside of North America, and it ditches much of the sound effects and humor for a more true-to-life, true-life adventure. The film features two sides of these wild cats. The vicious hunters, which we see on screen as we learn about zebras and elephants and wildebeests. But we also get to see the family dynamics and softer side of these big cats. It's an impressive feat to create such a film and get so up close and personal with these creatures that would otherwise probably murder the people with the camera. Like the circus before, lions are fascinating creatures, and they brought people to the theater. Unlike the two previous films, this movie didn't get an Academy Award. It didn't even get a nomination. But I can't help to think that this film, more than many of the other true life adventure films, is the one that inspired future documentary artists. Filmmakers that would go on to shoot footage of big giant animals in places that we've never been before, creating serious drama around the natural world. It's a grounded film that showcases the complexity of nature, and it does that very well. The next film in this series was another stark contrast to the films that came before it. The Secrets of Life took us down to a smaller level. to look at the world of flowers and insects. It's another groundbreaking film. Nobody had ever taken their cameras to such a microscopic level to create a documentary. This was the first time someone had used time-lapse to showcase the blossoming of floral life. Long shots of erupting volcanoes or bees and ants hard at work is truly breathtaking cinematography. And like the African lion, it wouldn't really go on to be that noteworthy. It didn't earn any Academy Award nominations and might be the most forgettable of the true life adventure films. PRAIRIE is definitely a film I'll lump in here, but it differs from the rest as it's considered by the company as a true life fantasy. In the last video about the live action Golden Age, I talked about Felix Salten's stories being purchased by Disney. The first to be made was Bambi, and then they also adapted the Shaggy Dog from one of his stories. PRAIRIE is another one of Felix Salten's stories. A simple story about a young squirrel, PRAIRIE, falling in love with another. It was shot over the span of 3 years in Utah and Wyoming. Footage had to be shot that would fit the already existing narrative. Over 300,000 feet of film was shot. It's about 3 times the amount of film that was shot for Seal Island. So if you were to watch all of that film back to back, you would be watching over 2 days worth of film footage. All of that was chopped down to an hour and 15-minute runtime. Certain sections were animated to help blend footage together, which also included a fun cameo from Bambi. PRAIRIE being named a true life fantasy was supposed to be the start of a brand new series of films, ones that would adapt narratives to real life footage. But the expense to make PRAIRIE exceeded the costs of the other true life adventure films, and the box office returns didn't meet the expectations that they had for the film. So PRAIRIE was the only true life fantasy that was ever made, and Walt and his crew returned to their classic formula for their next film, White Wilderness. Taking place in the Canadian Arctic, White Wilderness is a film steeped in controversy, and we'll get to that here in a minute, but it was a return to the formula that made the Vanishing PRAIRIE and the Living Desert award-winning films. Lots of good-looking footage with narration, music, and sound effects that helped add humor to the movie. Featuring wolverines and lemmings and polar bears, Disney's new film would be critically regarded as the best true life adventure yet. It would go on to win the Academy Award for Documentary Feature, the third from this series of films, but we would find out much later that this film had been made falsely. For the entire run of the true life adventures, Walt would go to independent filmmakers, hand them money, and they would go to exotic locations to shoot whatever footage Walt wanted. The Disney company never questioned the footage that was brought back, they just always wanted it so that they could edit and cut it down to make a feature film. Walt Disney and his company thought that most of these filmmakers were going out onto location and shooting film footage without human interference. However, in the 1980s, it was uncovered that White Wilderness was shot by a group of filmmakers that not only manipulated the narrative, a common occurrence with the true life adventure films and really most documentaries up to that time period, but these independent filmmakers manipulated the animals and their habitats. Footage of a polar bear sliding down a hill looked to have been shot on location, but the truth was that it was shot on a soundstage in Canada, with the filmmakers bringing the bear there and pushing it down the hill. Worse yet, there's a scene where several lemmings march in a row off a cliff into the freezing Arctic water, and that's where our narrator Winston Hibbler states that the group is migrating together and looking to cross the water, but some may drown along the way. The reality of this footage is that these lemmings were never really known to migrate in a group, and they were actually brought into downtown Calgary and filmed alongside the Bow River. What we now know is that these lemmings were lined up and killed off in a mass suicide to showcase a migration that would never naturally happen. We don't know, nor may we ever know, if Walt Disney or anybody at the Disney studio knew how this footage was being made. I'm going to show my bias here because I think that somebody at the studio knew and probably told Walt, because this was the second to last of the true life adventures ever made. And that's despite them being Oscar-winning films and continuing to make money on a cheap budget. The last of the true life adventures is 1960's Jungle Cat. Taking place in Brazil's Amazon rainforest, Jungle Cat features sloths, snakes, monkeys, crocodiles, otters, and the key figure to the story, jaguars. This is an overall serious take on documentary filmmaking, with the family of jaguars facing life and death on numerous occasions. It is the film with the most diverse animal species throughout the series of films, and it could be seen as the most colorful since it takes place in Brazil's rainforest rather than a dry desert or a frozen ice cap. It unfortunately didn't get nominated for an Academy Award, but did do quite well at the box office. In fact, it did better than its predecessor, White Wilderness. Throughout their run, the true life adventure films continued to make money, get critical praise, and win awards. So it is truly a mystery why Walt Disney and his company stopped making these films. The cost to make these films was very low, and the workload was put on independent filmmakers rather than anybody working at the studio. And the crew that did work on them at the studio, including Winston Hibbler, who wrote and narrated all of these films, was a pretty small crew. But I think there are several possible reasons that we can float around as to why this series of films ended. One could be that Walt Disney opted to adapt a lot of this footage to television. And from the thousands and thousands of feet of footage that he had from filmmakers over the last decade, he really didn't need to go out and shoot new film. He could continue to piece together 30-minute or hour-long narratives for television, and in fact he did do this, breaking up several of his features into smaller bits and pieces for his Sunday night TV slot. Another possibility is that Walt Disney himself just got tired of the genre. I personally think this is the least likely of all the possibilities, but it is possible. The third is that the Disney studios found out about how the footage was created for White Wilderness and no longer trusted independent filmmakers to go out and get them footage. With Walt Disney keeping everyone busy with animated and live action features at the studio, he really couldn't afford to send anyone on an excursion for months or even years at a time. Again, we'll never really know why these films stopped being created, but they did inspire future generations to film, explore, and create nature documentaries of their own. Thanks to Walt Disney, we ended up with entire TV networks dedicated to animal life, and documentaries are still being made today about the natural world. Disneyland's creation also focused on these films. Both Frontierland and Adventureland have housed true life adventure attractions, including Frontierland's Mine Train through Nature's Wonderland and Adventureland's Jungle Cruise. Yes, without the true life adventures, you'd never sail the rivers of the world, with a Jungle Cruise skipper telling you bad jokes as you make your way past lions and hippos. The Disney company would return to the format in the 2000s with a brand new branch of the company called Disney Nature. Like the true life adventures, these films are shot beautifully, with added narration to create a human connection. Although they aren't as critically or commercially beneficial, Disney still continues to make these films as a salute to the legacy of Walt Disney, his ambitious creation of the nature documentary genre, and to the true life adventure films that would inspire generations to be curious about the natural world that we all live in. If you like this video and you're interested in hearing more about Disney's live action film eras and their history, you can click the playlist over here and get caught up with all of the other videos. If you're interested in the history of Disney's animation, I have a whole series about that too. You can click on the playlist right over there, and it will tell you the history of Disney animation from Snow White all the way to current times. And if you made it this far, give this video a thumbs up, give it a like, and comment down below and tell me what your favorite documentary is, Disney or otherwise. But in the meantime, thank you for watching, my friends, and as always, keep moving forward.